So, exchange, what does that word mean to you? Today, I'm talking to Shamsher Virk, who is a master of exchange. He organises and coordinates exchanges between nations, between artists and practitioners of different disciplines. And we're looking at what that word means and why it's so important in the world today. Shamsher Virk, I am very pleased to welcome you today. Shamsher, for those of you who are watching, is a Senior Director of Programs and Operations for Leonardo organisation. He's an interdisciplinary performance artist, an expert in strategy and planning, has a human ecology and community development background, and we met together from memory in this mad little panel that we did, that you were hosting for ICEA, which was really glorious. And I just remember from that panel thinking, what a lovely energy this person has. He's somebody who knows how to facilitate and bring people together. And that's essentially what you do for a living, as I understand it. Do you want to say a little bit more about yourself, please?
Oh, thank you for that kind introduction, Maggie. And yes, I also have fond memories of our first encounter, sharing institutional presentations as part of ISEA, or the International Symposium on Electronic Arts, this past spring, which took place in Brisbane. But neither of us were able to be there on the ground, so it meant all the more to connect virtually and find meaningful conversation and synergy. It's true that is my work is often to bring people together, to facilitate conversation, to do a lot of code switching and translation, to bring people from different backgrounds together, different institutional roles, and it is something I enjoy quite a lot, under the broader banner maybe of communicating across difference, or finding mutual understanding across distance and difference.
Is that something that you've had from when you were a small child? Like, I get an intuition that maybe part of your background involves kind of working across diverse cultures or in interesting settings, because the skill that I've seen in you and our many conversations we've had since then feels like an innate skill. It doesn't. I don't think people often learn that necessarily.
Oh, that's interesting. It's insightful to hear. You're definitely onto something. I mean, I'm an international mutt. As a child, growing up in Canada mostly. The son of an Indian father who actually himself is multicultural. His mother was Austrian, father Punjabi Indian, and growing up in Canada primarily, but traveling a lot. Where my mom is from, my mother's of Irish descent, Canadian. So we spent quite a bit of time as a family traveling between North America, Europe, and Asia. Definitely was exposed to different cultural settings and people from different cultural backgrounds through that life. And also in the home, we constantly had an emphasis on cultural exchange and hosted a lot of visiting students and fellows, part of the Rotary Exchange Network. Initially, I think we were a host with them. And then I did go to an international high school eventually as well, where I was exposed to 200 of us on a small campus in the woods from 84 different countries, so quite like a deep, intimate residential experience with folks from all over the world. I think that is the seed for my interest in international exchange, cultural exchange, and that sort of thing.
Can you say a little bit about this background, I guess most recently in this area of exchange? Obviously, you're working for Leonardo at the moment, but you've also had quite a lot of experience facilitating exchange and exchange across disciplines and exchange across nations, essentially.
Yeah, so just to skip ahead from those early experiences in international conversation and travel and education, I I'm sure we'll come back to some of the other place-based work and other sort of disciplinary work and interdisciplinary origins of this kind of work. But I re-encountered exchange in about 2016, I want to say, working on a project. It was about, we were designing play-based objects in downtown Oakland, California, with a group of architects who had been designing these interventions in public space, new forms of public architecture that could be played with. And I met some really interesting people through that work, one of whom was Kate Spacek, who was managing at the time the American Arts Incubator program out of 01. So American Arts Incubator was has now been wound down, but really is the source of the programmatic model and the source of inspiration for my current exchange work. It was a program that was co-developed with the U.S. State Department during the Hillary Clinton Secretary of State tenure, as part of a revival of public diplomacy programs and a rethinking of public diplomacy too, a kind of movement from the older traditional, what I like to call the show and tell model, where countries would take their A-list artists and show them off, do a sort of show and tell in all the major cities in another country, and that was considered public diplomacy. A movement from that model to something more interactive and something that was committed to different goals, rather than just showing off the shiny artistic excellence of a particular place or cultural productivity of a particular place. Instead, to actually build bridges and create meaningful relationships between people from different places, and have those relationships form a foundation that would inform professional development, professional network building, skill exchange, creative entrepreneurship, thinking really from diverse perspectives about the intractable problems of the world, and trying to kind of take on and chew on those really challenging issues of the moment around social and environmental challenges.
Mm. And you're working currently at the moment for Leonardo. Can you say a little bit about that role? For those who don't know about Leonardo, a little bit about what the premise of the organization is?
Certainly, yeah. So Leonardo, or Leonardo ISAST, which is short for the International Society for Arts, Sciences, and Technology, is a nonprofit that has been around for many, many years. I think incorporated as a nonprofit in the early 80s, but publishing our sort of centerpiece journal, Leonardo, currently through MIT Press, for almost 60 years. I think we're up to over 55 years now. So as an organization, Leonardo really had as its central pillar publication of a journal and a book series, but has in recent years, especially over the last 10 years, grown out programming in other areas of interest to those who are doing interdisciplinary work at that intersection of art, science, and technology. So Leonardo has a history now of doing residencies, fellowships, workshops, exhibitions, all sorts of different programmatic elements. And Exchange is one of the newer additions to that already international network. The Exchange work that we're doing currently is based on the models developed by 01, which is another media arts nonprofit, also founded here in the San Francisco Bay Area, like Leonardo, but focused really more on local Bay Area public arts education, a biennial that we ran for many years, and eventually this kind of rethinking of public diplomacy and exchange work. So about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I met with Diana Aitenshenker, the CEO of Leonardo, in my role as the executive director of 01, and we discussed this joining of forces, beginning a strategic partnership that's been underway since then. And through that collaboration, we've actually absorbed 01 into Leonardo, programming its history and archive and so forth. So the role that I've taken on is really to help oversee the operations of Leonardo and help Leonardo in a moment of professionalization and scaling, to build those systems for the team, while also carrying over the mantle of programming from 01. and the institutional knowledge about how we ran exchange with 01 specifically. So I sort of have my hand in both the programs and the operations of Leonardo more broadly, but my specific programmatic area of focus is exchange.
Mm. How do you reconcile, or what is the relationship between, I guess, international exchange and also your background in very strong place-based or public arts practice, which is very site-specific? How do those two things work together, do you sense?
Well, I definitely come to the exchange work coming out of several experiences of place-based or sort of placemaking, placekeeping projects in the arts that definitely do inform sort of the ethics of interaction that I uphold, and I think the way that I see exchange being most effective. The experiences that I was part of leading up to the beginning the work with 01 on exchange did have to do with civic space design, placemaking, placekeeping in the context of urban development, and here in the Bay Area, contending with gentrification and rapid urban change in response to the Tech 2.0 boom. So I was working with a theater called Counterpulse in San Francisco, in communications, primarily communications and community engagement with the theater. And we just so happened to be on the same block that Twitter decided to move into in 2011. So when Twitter moved in on the other side of the block, I think our rent jumped from $12 a square foot to $54 a square foot within a matter of 12 months, or that was the sort of the going rate in that neighborhood. Needless to say, we ended up in a challenging conversation with our landlord and ended up losing that space. But thankfully, through work with the city of San Francisco, community benefit districts that included some of those tech businesses that had moved onto the block, and also a bunch of other local businesses, nonprofits, service providers in the area, we kind of all came together to take on this challenge of how we maintain and grow and nurture culture in a city that is many of the facts of life in the city are dictated by capitalist real estate pressures, larger movements of capital and people, and things like that are outside the purview of your average nonprofit. So I think that sort of work helped me to see and to realize that working with local businesses is an important partnership foundation to build. Working with other service providers and thinking about how you can complement each other's work. With that theater, we ended up producing some community art events, working with local SROs, or single room occupancy hotels, for low-income individuals in the neighborhood. So starting to provide some community programming that wasn't there before, that also built a network between us and them to advocate for the community itself when facing pressures from corporate or real estate interests that might not be aligned with our own. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that work, I think, a lot of my thinking about place-based cultural work comes out of those years working in San Francisco, going through that type of community change from a dance and theater perspective. But also more broadly, my interest in ecology and art and science, and thinking about people who are working out in site-specific ways out in the environment or in architectural contexts, where they're connected to the land and connecting to place and history with their work.
So in a world, we've spoken about this previously, in a world where it's expensive to travel, where climate change is impacting travel routes, so it's not as easy to even get from one place to another, how do we think about exchange, and what is the real root of that word, or the essence of what needs to happen for something really of benefit for both parties?
I think that my experience in recent years has underlined the importance of having some clear goals for what it is you hope to achieve through exchange from the outset. It can be many, many different things. But one of the ways that we've found it to be most effective as a practice is by, identifying one or more lead artists who have a particular interest in a place or in a topic, and have some skills to share, while also being deeply interested in learning from a community, or learning from people in that place. So this kind of split between an offering of skills that are relevant to a given community or of interest to a given community, with a listening role where there's an understanding that exchange is a two-way street, and that any exchange, even when between a more senior or junior practitioner, is always going to involve learning from both parties, and skill exchange or knowledge exchange coming from both parties. I think reciprocity maybe is the thing that I'm trying to point towards, and thinking of exchange as something that's not unidirectional.
I guess one of the things about exchange, or in any dynamic, particularly when it's intercultural, is potentially rank and power differences, as you alluded to there, like the difference between an emerging artist or another one, or someone from a particularly well-off institution or background coming to an area that doesn't have that. What are some of the issues that you've seen in the exchange area, and how do they get resolved?
Good question. I mean, I think I've been fortunate enough to have worked with several artists who've been through exchange experience with us, who really approach the experience with humility and with a sense of curiosity, so that even when they are confronted with these kinds of power dynamics that can come from seniority in the field, can also come from the origin or the place of origin of each of the participants, which might define their own resources. So someone coming from the global north, the global south, or from a relatively more affluent background, working with folks who have fewer resources. These kinds of distinctions and differences. For the most part, my experience has been that the act of co-creation, of creative collaboration, brings people together in such a way as they are able to let go of those differences that might, hamper connection or communication at the outset, and often are really creative about finding new ways of thinking about sharing resources, sharing knowledge. So I think the act of exchange is probably the best. The act of creative co-creation or exchange is the way that we've addressed those differences most effectively. And often I find, the tables just get turned quite quickly. A brief example drawing from the relatively recent exchange that we ran through Leonardo in Otepoti, Dunedin. We had a Hawaiian lead artist, Tiara Rabeau, who was our, sort of U.S. expert, so to speak, traveling to Dunedin to work with local participants, share some skills in media arts, but also to draw out from the participants ideas for projects that would address climate change. And they're looking specifically at Indigenous perspectives on that challenge, given that the lead artist was coming from Hawaiian Indigenous descent, and we actually had a majority Maori participant group as well. And in the process of starting this exchange off, where Tiara is clearly in the lead, and the kind of purveyor of skills and knowledge, we discovered in the first few days, and this is credit to Tiara, several experts among the participants in various elements of either Maori culture or local civic processes within Dunedin, how the city was approaching climate change mitigation, to a traditional cacao ceremony. And very quickly, these roles, these other areas of knowledge where various participants had expertise, became core elements of the exchange. And they were sort of given time on the schedule to lead an exercise, lead an orientation, give some sort of presentation. or facilitate a conversation or presentation. So I think a kind of shared approach, shared leadership approach among the people who are conducting exchange, and an openness to changing format and changing focus, sort of lifting people up or receding into the background in quite a dynamic way, has been really helpful as well, rather than assuming fixed roles from the beginning and kind of maintaining them, so that the expert is always the expert, and the participants are always the quiet and passive learners, listeners.
Mm. I guess one of the things that comes to me as you're speaking is often I find in my experience when I'm working in sort of the art, science, tech, cross-disciplinary space, it can sometimes be quite head level. It can be quite almost technical and quite analytical, like fine arts analytical meets science analytical meets engineering tech analytical. And I find it a struggle myself to kind of bring in my whole self in a multidimensional way, that kind of practice about interconnectivity, or my practice in connection to the earth. But when I hear you talk, what I feel behind it is that actually the spirit of exchange is actually, there's an element of spirit in there somewhere, surely, like where two people are meeting and they're realizing the commonalities, or they're generating some kind of creative intelligence together, or I'm hesitating because I always hesitate to bring this up with people, but do you feel that there's a bigger sense of what's happening here, that's not just about we're going to do some diplomacy between countries?
A spiritual element, is that what you're leaning into?
Yeah.
This more holistic piece of the puzzle. I mean, I think in the case of the exchanges that many of the exchanges we've run, both through Leonardo and through 01, certainly there was a kind of state-based public diplomacy, sort of formal background or frame to the experience. And while I do think that the work is actually having meaningful impact on in the areas that the stakeholders, funders for that sort of work are interested in, I think at its core, the exchange experience, is always about this sort of person to person, spirit to spirit, very human connection, and a lot of the in between experiences that take place when you're fortunate enough to actually travel to another place and experience exchange on the ground are really important elements to the experience. So the breaking of bread together, sharing food, field trips, and having in-person experiences in the environment. Again, thinking about Otepoti, Dunedin, going out with the participant group and walking the beaches and breathing the air and hearing the water and seeing the birds and being in the environment, also urban environments included. I think those are core elements of exchange. So I do think that being in each other's presence as whole humans who are not only engaged in rigorous intellectual debate and exchange of ideas and skills, but are actually just experiencing things together as bodies in space, is pretty key and core. And it's often where, like, I think those undefinable cultural differences and moments of inspiration and friction take place. So I think now I'm getting ahead to another sort of question I know we're both chewing on, but how to have that kind of rich experience through exchange when thinking about virtual exchange or doing work across distance where we're not able to be in the same place at the same time, is kind of one of those cruxes that I'm also thinking about, thinking hard about.
I'm mulling on that too as you're speaking, and I'm thinking about transdisciplinary practice for me is about relationality, and it's about that third space where you're kind of here, and then there's a discipline here or a person here, and then there's a magic that happens in the third space between you where you kind of make something, or something generates or manifests in that location. And I have seen it happen. I've experienced things where there's been quite a lot of virtual discussion and so forth, but at some point it feels like that lands by being in person with each other. At some point, I notice. I certainly have done projects where I've never physically met the people, but it feels like if there's a conflict, sometimes it becomes harder. It just becomes a little bit harder when there's no physicality or no. In Māori, they have an expression, kanohi ki te kanohi, which is like when you kind of face to face, nose to nose somebody. You just kind of, I'll work it out with you. I'll hold your hand. I'll have a cry, or we'll cry together at the world or something. But there's something about the presence that's important in those situations. If it's all going well, I think it kind of is fine, but it's when things go down, I just don't know if you can do it without a very, very long Zoom call or something. I don't know about that. I'm still mulling on it.
Yeah, I don't think we've figured it out quite yet. I mean, how to do that digitally, or through some sort of, yeah. So, maybe we need more tactile technologies at distance so that we can actually, touch nose to nose. I do think there are elements of, cultural experience that do translate to the digital realm better than others. We had we were forced into some interesting experiences that did teach us something about this, I think, through the pandemic. Up until 2020, we had been running American Arts Incubator exchanges as in-person exchanges with a lead artist on the ground for a month with local participants, prototyping, making projects together, sharing space, sharing meals, and so forth. And then, as with everyone everywhere in the world, really at that moment in early 2020, we had to shut down travel and stay still. And yet we wanted to be able to continue with our exchange work. So we pivoted quite quickly to run that year's exchanges entirely as virtual exchanges. And then following the lessons learned during that season, we ran some hybrid exchanges, which were kind of a mix in the subsequent years. And I do think that we discovered some things through that process. I can name a few of them. One is that you can certainly create ritualistic experience or ritual through an online gathering. And I think ritual is one of those practices that communal practices that we often reserve for in-person experience and don't get, when we get on a Zoom call, there's no there are very few minor rituals that are common. Whereas if you go and meet a new partner on the ground, you'll likely go for a coffee or a lunch or a meal. You'll do these things, maybe go for a walk with them locally. I think we can create ritual experiences on screen, for example, or in this sort of format. One example would be to bring things in. So we've had participants bring an object that matters to them for some reason, or so let me think of one example. So a relationship to water. I think we did an exchange in Amman, Jordan, where we were looking at the future of water in a desert region that, of course, has its challenges cut out for it in terms of water sustainability. And participants were given the homework to go home on a given evening and to come back with a story about their connection to water through their home or through their own personal life, which provided this kind of vantage point into a much more subjective experience of this very big issue that we all share. So I think there can be kind of sharing or show and tell type experience that can create a ritual. We've through theater that also pivoted during the pandemic, using digital tools to try to create theatrical experiences. There were some interesting experiments as well. Movement exercises where you can actually dance together for a moment on screen, learn simple choreography. Or another assignment that I think also helped ground people in a way that I have not seen usually in Zoom calls, is to have everyone on the call take their webcam or laptop to the window and show us what's outside their window. or their closest view to the outdoor world. So just grounding in place in other ways. I think that there are likely many more, activities like that could help us to have more holistic experiences or more grounded experiences, while being remotely connected.
So we're coming close up to time. Is there anything that I haven't asked you, or that you feel that would be really important to share with people about your work, or I guess that principle of exchange that we've been discussing?
I mean, so much more to say about all of these things: community-based work, exchange, interdisciplinary work. I mean, I think I would maybe one more thing I would say about exchange specifically is that it was surprising to me to learn through the first several years of facilitating this type of exchange that one of the most powerful experiences people took away from the incubator, the American Arts Incubator exchange experience, was a sense of personal creative agency. And this is touching both on exchange as a practice, but also on interdisciplinary work. When people came into the experience, I think they often identified as someone who had a more disciplinarily defined existence. They're like, I'm someone who is an art student who's coming into this with that background, or I'm someone who was an engineer, but I'm also interested in, let's say, the future of water in Jordan. And people would have their educational background and their identity in a more fixed place, and they would often either identify as an artist or not. In many cases, someone who was sort of very tentative about using that term. But through the act of exchanging ideas, very simple, relatively simple practical skills, making more accessible digital tools, and then creating something, prototyping something together, there was a kind of aha moment that occurred for many people. I would even say quite confidently that the majority of the participants, that they moved from a feeling of either not feeling like they were an artist or a creative agent in their world, to feeling like, as a matter of fact, I am someone who has something to say and I have the ability to say it. And I'm excited, perhaps coming out of this experience, to say that thing with these new tools or in these new ways. So I think that at the core of these interdisciplinary and exchange experiences, the impact they can have on people is a sense of subjective, a sort of reification of their own subjective experience. Like the way I'm connecting all these dots across disciplines, across cultures, is unique to me, and I have the power to put words to that, to put images to that, to make some sort of expressive gesture, and that's an empowering feeling.
I guess one of the things that I've always had in my practice is the sense that I learn about myself the most when I encounter the other. So actually, and if I encounter very different others, then that's the most, I learn the most about myself through that difference. And I think that's fundamentally what you're doing. You're allowing people to do inner work while they're doing creative work in the world, which is a fabulous practice that everybody needs at the moment, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think you're getting to the core of it as well. The way in which encountering otherness really does help us see ourselves in new ways. And often I think can kind of shake us out of more fixed positions, or fixed understandings of who we are, or what our place is in our particular world.
Well, you're doing marvelous work, and I really appreciate you speaking us today. Every time we speak, I feel like we're having our own exchange at the moment. So I appreciate that we're putting that into practice in some way or another. And I recommend that everyone who is watching this or listening to this check out the links to the work that you are doing, Shamsher, and very valuable work in the world. So I look forward to seeing what evolves next.
Same. I'm really enjoying getting to know each other, Maggie, and exchanging our methods and insights coming out of the work of interdisciplinary exchange.
Methods and madness. All right. Take care. Thank
There you
you.
go. Thanks so much.